So I would now invite Nomindari Enkhtur, CEO of Mongolian Nature's Legacy Foundation, which is an environmental trust fund established in 2024 with the mission to provide sustainable financing for impactful biodiversity, conservation projects and initiatives, as well as the renowned Mark Titterington, who is of course the co-founder of this forum, to join us on stage, and we'll get cracking with the inspirational talk. And ladies and gentlemen, in terms of timing, once this segment is over, we will then proceed with the next panel debate on how can we finance and accelerate the transition on the ground, carrying on from the discussion, the broader discussion on geopolitics this morning. That will run until around 1:10, at which point we will then break for a welcome lunch. So please put your hands together for Mark Titterington and Nomi.
Thank you. Thank you so much indeed, Rose. One of the great things about the forum, one of the privileges of working at the forum, is the ability to bring in different perspectives from right around the world. We've talked a lot already about finance, and I think that's one of the key elements that we've got to talk about and address in terms of how we drive the transition. So it was beyond delight to have you with us, Nomindari, to share with us your perspective, not just from your experience in building a career in sustainable finance, but in particular from the experience that you've had in Mongolia. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mark, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be on the stage with you. This is the first time for me to be part of this forum, and obviously I come from a very different country with a little bit different context in terms of, I think, the political situation, the environmental situation, also the agricultural situation. But I wanted to share a little bit about the story of Mongolia that also, I think, will show you how connected we are and how we are facing a lot of similar issues and how in Mongolia we are trying to solve this. And first of all, I wanted to thank for inviting me, to the organizers, and also to TNC for giving us the chance to share about Mongolia. So for some of you, you might have visited Mongolia, you may have heard about Mongolia, especially about the rich culture and the history we have related to Genghis Khan and, once being one of the largest empires of the world. But what we have to offer is really beyond that. Mongolia is a country that has vast, open, beautiful landscape. We are only 3 million people. But I think the size of our land is 156 million hectares. So I think that's larger than Germany, France, and Spain combined. But what's more important is that these important, beautiful landscapes that you can see here on the photo, they're one of the last remaining untouched, intact ecosystems that we have on Earth. So these are not only beautiful, breathtaking places, but these are especially important to protect because they're major carbon sinks, and they offer very important also biodiversity hotspots that benefit not only the environment, but also economies and everyone that depends on it. Another thing that I wanted to also highlight was, Mongolia's leadership when it comes to conservation. For example, when we talk about protected areas, we all have the global goal of reaching 30 by 30. In Mongolia, we have so far protected 21% of our land at the state level, another 20% at the local level, in addition to also forest and conservation, other water conservation areas. And here's just one interesting fact. Many of you might know that the Yellowstone National Park in the US is known as the first protected area in the world, but in fact, Mongolia has started protecting its land way before that, during the 12th and the 13th century, during Genghis Khan time. So this is really inherently in the culture, in the nature of Mongolia, and how important really conservation and protection is. But perhaps the contribution that Mongolia gives to the global, I think, conservation agenda is beyond also its landscapes. What's really critical is also the people that have been protecting these landscapes for centuries. So Mongolian nomadic people over the whole centuries, they still make up 30% of the population, and they really depend and live right on these on these landscapes. So it's the only source of livelihood they have, and they're critical part really in ensuring that we protect these important landscapes also going forward. But they live in very harsh situations as well. If you know about the life nomadic culture, how it is, basically they move around the year with their yurt, right? During the different very harsh, seasonals and climates, but inherently they lived a very minimal, resource efficient, and nature positive type of life that we want to build. So really before, I think globally we came up with the concept of sustainability, this is something that is still until today have been and is practiced by Mongolian herders in our country. But the situation, as we all know, is not so good anymore. And as you can see here, just wanted to share a couple of statistics. We are facing a double threat of first climate change, of course, but also unsustainable use. That's driven, as you all know, by economic pressures, more production, right? Different unsustainable policies, and also the not so nice directions when it comes to the supply chain development that's triggering this. And as a result of this, basically Mongolia is warming twice as faster if you compare it to the global average. 80% of our land is facing some level of degradation. I think more than 50% we have lost our permafrost coverage, and this of course is creating a lot of climate events more frequently and more at the intensity. And just before coming here, the second picture that you can show here, this is just from a few days ago. Of course, now it's the drier season, but this type of dust storms you will see all around the country. And there, satellite simulations, NASA simulations that show that this dust that starts from Mongolia, travels to Asia, travels over the ocean, goes to North America. So this really, is a problem that's facing everyone. It shows how interconnected we are. And beyond, the environmental issues that we are facing, you will also see here that because of the intensive climate events that we're facing, for example, winter storms, last year alone, our nomads herders have lost 7 million livestock, around 12% of the total livestock population. And as I said, they depend on this as their only income, and because of the situation, they are now forced to migrate into the city and leave their important lands. And I come from the capital city of Ulaanbaatar, but this condition affects me, because now these herders coming in with their yurts, settling informally in the outskirts of the city, they burn coal, to keep warm in the winter. They don't have, connection to the central heating systems, the sewage system and everything, and that creates a huge air pollution issue in the country. We are among the most polluted capital cities in the world, and then you can imagine that also creates like a health crisis, economic crisis, supply chain disruptions and everything. So the issues that we are facing in some parts of the world, I think we are still debating whether climate change or biodiversity loss is actually true or not. But in Mongolia, it's really the case where on a daily basis, everyone is living it and everyone is feeling it. So obviously, we are looking for, different ways and solutions to change that. And we know that shifting into sustainable agriculture, everything that we want to reach requires complex, solutions. It's not a very simple way to reach it. Of course, it requires policy, technology, right, engagement from the people on the ground. But one critical part that we should focus on, and I think the next panel will be addressing, is about the financing agenda and the financing part. If we compare to where we were 10 years ago, right, where there was a lot of debate about why it's needed, what we had to do, I think we are past that question. The question that we have to answer ourselves now is really how to do it and how are we going to finance it. And the example that I wanted to share is a financing model that we have started implementing in Mongolia. It's called the Eternal Mongolia Project Finance for Permanence Initiative. It's a long, complex name. It's a complex financing initiative. We call it PFBs. We are among 20 PFBs all around the world. And the main goal of the PFPs is to really fund conservation protection, not temporarily, but create a sustained long-term funding source to keep up that agenda. And in very simple words, what it is, all the stakeholders, including the donor community, the government, the private sector, comes together. We set specific environmental conservation targets, and in our case, this is about protecting our landscapes, reaching the 30 by 30 goal, managing better these places, but most importantly, promoting and supporting also the communities and the people that live in and around the protected areas. And then once we set the targets, we come up with a very long-term implementation plan. And obviously there are a lot of ambitious things where we have to change a lot of the law. We have to help the public budget fully transition into more results-based financing. But then all the funders, the partners, commit to the financing structure and you secure the funding that's needed to implement the goals in a single deal. So in the case of Mongolia, it's a $200 million initiative, more than 15 years, 71 million is coming from donors and the philanthropic community, thanks to the Nature Conservancy's efforts on this. And the rest of the 127 million is basically coming from government and other public funding sources. So it's very small to see here, but some of the things that we are looking at is tackling public budget policies, introducing environmental taxes, new conservation levies, but also on the private sector side, we realize there is much more that could be done. So the PFP basically helps with setting the policy environment for also market-based mechanisms, so including offsets, green funding, green loans, and also biodiversity credits and carbon credits are things that we are exploring. So very simply, I think in short, what it is basically an integrated financing initiative, because what we have to realize, I think no funding or financing source alone can tackle this issue, and we cannot also replace the role of each funding sources, right? What private sector can do is powerful, but sometimes also limited, right? Especially when we think about accessibility, right? What public sector can do is also very powerful, but scalability sometimes is the issue, right? So that's why we are trying to create a situation where really all of these funding sources are working together towards the same goal. Another just last, I think, example that I wanted to mention before I end my intervention is an example scheme of a sustainability-linked loan initiative that focuses on the agriculture sector. I've mentioned that overgrazing is a big issue that we are facing in the countries now with 60 million livestock and only 3 million people, and driving all of these difficult situations that we are facing. And this sustainability-linked financing mechanism basically is a transition finance instrument that helps both the herders but also the producers in the supply chain go in the right direction. You start with making commitments to destock, to commit to certain conservation targets, and as a return, you benefit from more affordable funding, you benefit from better access to also markets, to different supply chains, and then the biggest innovation of this is that we are also linking a digital impact verification system. I think when we talk about sustainable finance, everyone knows it's nice, we are really trying to do it, but it remains to be a little bit costly, especially when we talk about the impact verification and the outcome and results. So we're building a system that comes with satellite data, national level data that the government already has. We have a lot of data, right? And we're using that, and then building an additional layer of verification of data that's coming from the households themselves. And I think the last step of the scheme is really important, because at the end, once we achieve all the impact, the outcome on the ground, we want to monetize it. We really want to ensure that we value, right, the protection, the nature outcomes, the environmental protection outcomes of it, and link it to nature and carbon markets. So this is just an example of how we're doing. And to sum up my, I think, discussion, I just wanted to refer to a saying that we use in Mongolia about the eternal blue sky. So we're a country that's most of the time have a very clear blue sky. But what it really means is that all life on Earth exists under the same sky. So we might have a little bit different challenges, different contexts, different political situations, but at the end, we are living under the same sky. So I think the only way to move forward is really to working together. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Nomindari, I loved our discussion over dinner last night, and you absolutely haven't disappointed. We all like our own prejudices confirmed, and you've confirmed a lot of the forum's thinking in terms of how you bring together the public sector, the private finance, the philanthropic contribution, creative use of the tax system as well. My question, I think, to kick us off is how did you get an alignment that you needed all of those different elements to come together to be able to drive this forward?
Yeah, of course, it's not an easy process. And if I share actually the story in Mongolia to build, I think, an ecosystem of sustainable finance, it took more than 10 years. We actually started in 2013, even before the Paris Agreement came in place, even before the SDG started. And what's really interesting, we started as a private sector market-based movement alone. So there was no push from, central bank, any regulators. All the financial institutions just voluntarily came along and said, okay, we have to stop this cycle. This is not sustainable. And we have the power. Finance has a lot of power, right? And we said that we would work together on it. So I think it's a lot of consistency. I know when we talk about the different challenges that we are, the 2030 agenda that's coming just in 5 years, I know there's urgency, but sometimes it's also critical that we really recognize the importance of permanence, consistency, and patience. Because one thing, especially working a lot with private sector, helping them to transition into sustainability, what I do realize is the level playing field, sometimes it's not the same, right? It's sometimes difficult when you talk to a company where you have very strong governance or the shareholders that understand the values. But sometimes for companies that do not have all the pieces already in place, you need to provide an enabling environment that helps them, take that next step. So all of these things, I think, require persistence, and then creating a platform, I think, like the forum, where people come together, because we are already doing a lot of different things that can be helpful to each other. So creating the spaces was really important in our case.
When you now look back over the last 10 to 13 years or whatever, what do you wish you'd perhaps maybe done differently to go faster? What did you learn?
Yeah.
And when you look forward to the next 10 years of this, what's going to be the critical success factor that is going to ensure you achieve your goals?
Frankly speaking, although we are very proud that we started as a market-based initiative, I think which really, gives us the sustainability of our work. At the same time, we felt that we should have also involved public policy and government a bit earlier, because at the end, we cannot do this voluntary base forever. There needs to be really strong also policy signals, public incentives, right? Certain subsidies, as I mentioned, like to start with that initial transition. So that's some of the things that we are still sometimes, struggling to really get in place. And now with, I think, the world changing, a lot of priorities, political priorities also shifting, that remains an issue. So I think the public policy, government policy, it's really critical. It's an absolutely must. The longer term vision has to be set. The signals needs to be made. It needs to be mandated. But at the same time, it has to be a phased transitioned approach, right? And then it's really critical for the initial years to provide that support system for the sector to really move. So if I were to say, if we had like a mix of really private sector and government from the beginning working together in the sustainable finance, then that would have been great. But for the PFP initiative, we are actually addressing that issue. And you can see now that in this 200 million financing deal, we actually have the government leading this whole process and committing to a lot of ambitious reforms. So it makes really a difference, compared to the type of work that I used to do more only with the private sector.
Great message. A final question, because I know we need to get on to the panel. Again, we discussed it over dinner last night. You mentioned verification. How important, how critical is that for you, particularly when you're using taxpayers' euros or people investing in credits or companies investing in outcomes that they want to count? How important is verification?
verification is at the core of everything, like whether that's public funding, what's that private funding. At the end, we really need to know it's going in the right direction. With the results-based financing reform in Mongolia, we are looking at doubling or tripling at least the public budgets that's spent on the environment, which is great. But at the same time, we need to really ensure that the environmental impacts are achieved. So it requires a system where I think we have to also move a little bit away from past practices, right, where it's very, operations practice-based and learning to really plan in the direction of outcomes and impacts. And this is not easy. I think there will be a panel in the afternoon that talks about digitization, right, and how you use technology in it. But I think it's a combination of everything. It's a combination of research and science. It's a combination of involving the government in the data that they already have. And then, as I said, ensuring that, especially in a country like Mongolia, we have huge landscapes. It's really costly to collect data. So the best shot is actually that we work with the people, with the communities on the ground to also help verify and give that additional level of data that's needed. But it's absolutely critical. And whenever there's any financing discussion, I think we need to a little bit think backwards, really start with what's the impact, what's the outcome, what are we going to achieve, and then link your financing system from there, and then that comes to the planning, right? And often we make a mistake by planning, putting a lot of targets, and then, on the way, we fade out with that initial mission that we are trying to reach. So that's absolutely critical.
Well, look, I could spend the next 10, 15 minutes talking to you. I think you did an outstanding job and giving us an insight into where you came from, where you are, where you're going with the initiative in Mongolia. That surely will have given food for thought for the next panel. It's great to have you with us. Thanks very much indeed for making the trip. Ladies and gentlemen, Nomindari Enkhtur.
Thank you.